We're less than a week away from Apple's big event in California, which means Editor-in-Chief Dana Woolman and I are going to be packing our bags and eating a lot of In-N-Out and jamming out to Lizzo in the car a lot while we check out what Apple's been working on. And it is going to be a lot of stuff. This is, after all, the time of year when Apple shows off new iPhones, iPads, Macs, and probably a few other surprises to boot. So we thought, before we get on that plane, let's you and I take a moment to figure out what Apple's really going to show off here. Now, it's September, it's iPhone season. You probably didn't need me to tell you that, but we do have, at this point in time, a clearer sense of what these phones are bringing to the table and what Apple has chosen to focus on. And this time around, cameras will be a big area of improvement for Apple. I mean, they do sort of say that every year, but this time we are getting what appears to be a triple camera system on the two more premium versions of the iPhone. That third camera is meant to act as an ultra-wide angle sensor like we see in devices like the Galaxy S10 series. They're really helpful to add a lot of flexibility to your shooting. I personally would take those over a telephoto camera any day. I should point out that you still have the telephoto camera in those premium iPhones. The successor to the iPhone XR, which might be called the iPhone 11, we're not sure, and I'll get back to that in a second, but the successor to the iPhone XR is supposed to get a second camera as well. That's strictly for zoom, just to give it the level of capability you could expect from last year's more premium iPhones. As I mentioned, we are expecting to see 3 iPhones here. These are direct sequels to the devices we saw last year, and they're going to have the same size screen, so at least when you look at these devices from the front, they're going to look pretty much the same. The camera hump on the back will be different to accommodate those extra cameras, and we're also hearing that you can expect a few extra finishes as well. So yeah, as mentioned, we are looking at 3 iPhones here. These are direct sequels to the devices we got last year, and although they're supposed to have the exact same size screens as the iPhone XS, XS Max, and XR, we are expecting Apple to finally get rid of 3D Touch here. That's the pressure-sensitive display technology that's been a thing on iPhones for a good few years now. The thing is, with the iPhone XR last year, Apple proved that you didn't really need it. You could long press on an app icon and get to really the same actions with hardly any difference in the experience. So why spend extra money on that pressure sensing tech when good old-fashioned software does the trick just fine? There will be a few other improvements here. We've heard that water resistance will be improved to the point where you could probably dunk an iPhone in a tub of water for up to a half hour. Not that you'd want to, but you should be able to if the reports hold true. Video performance out of those cameras is supposed to be highly improved as well, although to be fair, I think anything is kind of an improvement. The iPhones do fine as video cameras, but I wouldn't necessarily think of them as the best that you could find in a smartphone right now. And I should also point out that we're expecting the iPhones to come with bi-directional charging. Basically, like with a Galaxy S10 or a Galaxy Note 10, you'd be able to wirelessly charge, say, AirPods using the back of the iPhone. There's no word on whether you'd be able to use that for your Apple Watch as well. It sort of stands to reason that you should be able to, but there are some interesting differences between the way these things charge, so we'll just kind of have to wait and see. So yeah, we do know a lot about these iPhones already, but we don't know what they're going to be called, and that seems to be the biggest question still surrounding these devices. Some have suggested that the iPhone XR sequel will be called the iPhone 11, leaving the iPhone XS and XS Max sequels to be called the iPhone Pro and Pro Max respectively. Those are a little bit silly, but to me at least, they're probably as elegant as we're going to get. Most recently, we've seen these names pop up in a supposedly leaked document that outlines Apple's software launch plans for the next few months, but this document, if you have not seen it, does look at least a little bit sketchy, so for all we know, these names are still up in the air. So yeah, the iPhones are getting the lion's share of the updates here, but that's not to say the rest of Apple's product lines aren't getting attention. The iPads, for instance, got a lot of work over the last year. The iPad Pros were revamped almost completely last year, and we got new versions of the iPad Air and the iPad Mini earlier in 2019. I honestly never thought we'd see a new iPad Mini again, so for that I am specifically grateful. This time around, we are expecting Apple to release an updated version of its baseline cheap iPad, which is just called the iPad. If the rumors hold true, it'll have a 10.2-inch display, which means that Apple will have officially done away with the 9.7-inch screen form factor that's more or less been a thing since the iPad launched years and years ago. You should also expect Apple to update the iPad Pros, although dramatic differences are not really the name of the game here. They'll get the same triple camera setup that we see in the iPhone Pro series, but aside from that, it really kind of seems like iPadOS 13 is the star of the show here. Like the iPad Pros before it, the Apple Watch also got a pretty significant update last year with bigger bodies, bigger screens, improved performance, better battery life. It was a big deal, and it makes sense that Apple wouldn't rewrite that formula for this year. watchOS 6 is clearly going to be the star of the show, and while we have seen snippets of code that suggest we're getting titanium and ceramic models, I honestly don't think there's going to be a whole lot new to write home about on this front. Really, we're just expecting whatever version of the Apple Watch Apple does show off at its event to just serve as a canvas for watchOS 6 and all of the features it brings to the table, like its dedicated app store, like its ambient noise and volume detection app, like cycle tracking. These are really substantive improvements and additions to the watchOS formula, and some new hardware just to get this thing out there more broadly definitely couldn't hurt. We're now getting to the point in the year when Apple's getting ready to really kick off its original content push with services like Apple TV Plus and Apple Arcade, so I think expecting a new Apple TV is a smart move, especially in light of the rumors we've started to hear about in recent days. We have heard that a refreshed version of the Apple TV with an A12 Bionic chipset is in the works. Yes, I know this might not be the most interesting news you'll hear from Apple in the coming days, but this is a pretty significant upgrade. The A12 Bionic was originally used in devices like the iPhone XS and the XS Max and the XR, which means that the aging chipset inside current versions of the Apple TV are about to get a big boost. And that's going to be great when we start seeing these original games trickle onto our Apple devices. Now, there is one device that's been rumored more thoroughly and for longer than basically anything else we've talked about so far, and that is the new 16-inch MacBook Pro. This has been the subject of speculation and talk for quite some time now, and we're hearing that this might be the event that Apple actually pulls back the curtain on this thing. And it's about time, honestly. Apple hasn't released a big screen MacBook Pro in basically 10 years. This is really supposed to be a love letter to Apple's professional customers, the one they recently targeted with the Mac Pro, the Pro XDR display, and the $1,000 stand meant to prop up the Pro XDR display. We're not super clear on what the internals are going to be, but the design is supposed to be what really catches the eye here. Because the bezels around the 16-inch display are supposed to be so thin, we're looking ultimately at a body that isn't much bigger than your standard 15-inch MacBook Pro. Now, this is Apple we're talking about, so they like their one more things, they like their surprises, and they do like their smaller announcements too. So there are a couple things that we're sort of hoping to hear about that we're not convinced will get any time on stage. AirPods are one of these things. We got a refreshed version with very slightly actually, improved wireless performance and battery life just a few months ago. That said, Apple is reportedly going to unveil a slightly more premium version with features like water resistance and noise cancellation, which these are expensive wireless earbuds, and they should probably do more to justify the price that Apple is asking for. I've been saying this for a while, and maybe I'm just a little salty because the second generation AirPods that I was sent for review eventually died. So maybe do a little better. We've also heard persistent rumors that Apple is going to be showing off, or at least talking about, a cheaper version of the HomePod, which is kind of direly needed. We've heard that the original HomePod didn't sell super well because I don't think there was a huge market out there for premium sounding smart speakers. And just as a quick tangent, I am like 99% sure that's why Samsung hasn't pushed its Galaxy Home into the market yet. People just don't want these things. They want inexpensive ways to get voice assistants in their homes and maybe aren't so worried about audio quality on the whole. Oh, and last but not least, Apple is supposedly working on trackers, Bluetooth trackers, sort of like tiles that you stick on devices and just things that you tend to lose pretty often so you can find them using your phone. This is probably the strangest thing that Apple is rumored to be working on, if only because they're so mundane, but sometimes mundane is good. I lose my glasses all the time. I lose my wallet all the time. If I had one of these, I'd probably not worry about how my life is falling apart quite so frequently. So here's hoping Apple has more to share on that front in a couple days. You're just gonna have to wait and see, because I am also going to have to wait and see and have no additional insight to give you. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. If you want to keep tabs on what Apple's doing and just sort of what's happening in tech at large, keep it locked on Engadget. And if you'll excuse me, I'm going to start packing so I can get in the car and drive my boss around and eat a ton of burgers.